I am Rachel, 32 years old, and my grandfather left me $750,000 when he passed away. He raised me after my parents divorced, teaching me about money and responsibility. When I refused to give Mom my inheritance, claiming she needed it for family emergencies, she was furious. I stood my ground, knowing her history of financial irresponsibility. Then yesterday I got a text about an urgent family meeting at Aunt Shannon. Something felt off about the sudden invitation, but I went anyway. Before I tell you what happened when I walked into that ambush, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from and subscribe to hear how I stood my ground against my entire family. Growing up, stability was a foreign concept in my life. My parents divorced when I was 8, and the years that followed were a blur of weekend visitations, holiday negotiations, and constantly moving between two homes. Mom got primary custody, but her life was chaotic at best. We lived in 6 different apartments before I turned 15, each move prompted by unpaid rent or a new boyfriend she was chasing. Dad wasn't much better. He tried, but his work as a traveling salesman meant he was rarely around, and his child support payments were as inconsistent as his presence. This is where Grandpa William stepped in. He became my rock, my safe harbor in the storm of my childhood. Grandpa owned a modest home in a quiet neighborhood with big oak trees lining the streets. Every Wednesday after school, and most weekends, I would stay with him. Those were the only times I felt truly secure. He never missed a school event, taught me to change a tire, and most importantly, he taught me about financial responsibility. "Money doesn't grow on trees, Rachel," he would say, as we sat at his kitchen table balancing his checkbook. "You work for it, you respect it, and you never spend what you don't have." These lessons stuck with me, especially as I watched Mom's financial train wreck unfold year after year. Mom's relationship with money was toxic. When I was 16, she borrowed $2,000 from me, money I had saved from my part-time job at the local grocery store. It was for an emergency car repair, she claimed. The next day, she had a new designer purse, and the car remained broken. This pattern repeated throughout my life. When I was in college, I discovered she had opened 3 credit cards in my name, maxing them out and leaving me with debt that took years to clear from my credit report. The worst was when I was 25 and had just started my career as a physical therapist. Mom called crying that she was going to be evicted if she couldn't come up with rent money. I sent her $800 only to see her posting pictures of a weekend trip to Las Vegas on social media the following week. That was the last time I directly gave her money. Despite the family chaos, I managed to build a stable life for myself. I worked through college, got my degree in physical therapy, and secured a good job at Pacific Northwest Rehabilitation Center. I shared an apartment with my best friend Abigail, drove a reliable but modest car, and was slowly paying off my student loans. I was proud of my independence, especially knowing the odds I had overcome. Then last year, Grandpa got sick. Pancreatic cancer. It moved quickly, and within 3 months he was gone. Those final weeks were brutal but precious. I took family leave from work and stayed in his home caring for him, alongside hospice nurses. Mom visited twice, both times, asking about his will within earshot of him. I was mortified, but Grandpa just gave me a knowing look. The reading of the will was held in his attorney's office 1 month after the funeral. I expected Grandpa to leave me maybe a few $1,000s or some sentimental items. When the attorney announced that I was receiving the house and $750,000 from his life insurance and investments, I nearly fell out of my chair. Mom, sitting beside me, immediately grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. "That's wonderful, honey," she whispered, but her eyes were calculating. "That will help our whole family so much." I knew what was coming. The moment we stepped into the parking lot, Mom launched into all the ways the family could use that money: her credit card debt, my cousin Travis's college tuition, the family vacation home she had always dreamed of buying. "Mom," I said firmly, "Grandpa left this money to me, not to us." Her face darkened. "After all I've sacrificed for you, you're really going to be selfish with this windfall. This is family money. Your grandfather would want it to help everyone." But I knew better. Grandpa had been explicit in our private conversations during his final days. "This is for your future, Rachel. For the security I know you value." not for bailing out poor decisions. My plans for the inheritance were practical and would have made Grandpa proud. First, pay off my remaining student loans of $60,000. Then buy a modest home in a good neighborhood, something around $300,000 in our area. The rest would be invested for retirement and perhaps eventually starting my own physical therapy practice. The first confrontational phone call came just 3 days after the will reading. Mom called while I was at work. "I've been thinking about the inheritance," she began without even saying hello. "I need at least half for family necessities." "Mom, we've already discussed this." The answer is no. "You ungrateful little brat, after everything I've done for you, this is your grandfather's money, not yours, and he would be ashamed of how selfish you're being." The call devolved from there, ending with her threatening to contest the will and me hanging up in tears. My supervisor, Georgia, noticed my distress and sent me home early that day. Within a week, the family battle lines were drawn. Uncle Doug, Mom's brother, called to tell me I was tearing the family apart. Aunt Shannon suggested I was too young to handle such a large sum responsibly. Even my cousin Megan, who I had been close with growing up, texted to ask if I could spare $10,000 for her graduate school tuition. The only family member who didn't pressure me was my dad. When I called to tell him about the situation, he surprised me. "Your grandfather left that money to you because he trusted you, Rachel. Not your mother, not me, not anyone else. Stand your ground." I hung up feeling both supported and conflicted. The rational part of me knew I was making the right decision. The emotional part still battled with guilt, wondering if I was being selfish. Was I wrong to keep this money for myself when my family had needs? But then I would remember all the times Mom had squandered money, all the broken promises about repayment, all the financial chaos she had created in her life and mine. No, I wasn't wrong. I was honoring Grandpa's wishes and protecting my future, but standing firm was proving harder than I expected, and I could feel that this battle was just beginning. The pressure from my family didn't let up. If anything, it intensified over the next few weeks. Mom employed every manipulation tactic in her arsenal, alternating between guilt trips, sob stories, and dramatic appeals to family obligation. Her text messages arrived at all hours. June 5th, 2:14 a.m. Lying awake, wondering how I raised such a selfish daughter. Your grandfather would be so disappointed. June 7th, 11:22 a.m. My car broke down and I can't get to work. Need $3,000 for repairs. This is exactly why family should help family. June 10th, 7:30 p.m. Just had to borrow money from a payday loan place because my own daughter is hoarding family money. The interest will ruin me. The voicemails were worse. Her voice would crack with tears as she detailed her mounting bills, her health problems supposedly caused by stress, and how she had to tell friends she couldn't attend their events because her millionaire daughter wouldn't spare. Adime. I knew her claims were exaggerated or outright fabrications. Grandpa had left her $25,000 in his will, which she had immediately spent on a luxury cruise and shopping spree. She wasn't destitute, she was just bad with money, and saw my inheritance as the solution to her self-created problems. Mom wasn't working alone. She recruited family members as her proxies, creating a constant barrage of pressure from all sides. Aunt Shannon called on a Tuesday evening as I was making dinner. Her approach was more subtle than Mom's. "Rachel, honey, I'm worried about your mother's health," she began, voice laced with concern. "Her blood pressure is through the roof with all this stress about money. The doctor says she needs to reduce her anxiety, but she's so worried about making ends meet." "Aunt Shannon, I'm sorry to hear that, but Mom received money from Grandpa too. She chose how to spend it." "But that was such a small amount compared to what you got," Shannon pressed. "Surely you could spare a bit to help your own mother. Family takes care of family." That phrase was becoming their mantra, wielded like a weapon to make me feel guilty for having boundaries. Uncle Doug took a different approach when he called the following weekend. He was always the businessman of the family, and he came prepared with what he thought was a compromise. "Rachel, I understand your hesitation to just hand over money," he said smoothly. "That's why I've come up with a solution. You could provide your mother with a temporary loan. Nothing major, just 100,000 to help her get back on her feet. And the repayment terms I asked, already knowing the answer. Well, that's something you two could work out down the road, he hedged. The important thing is helping family in their time of need. There it was again, family. As if that magic word erased all boundaries and common sense. Even my cousins got involved. Most pressured me directly, but my cousin Megan surprised me with a warning call late one night. Rachel, I need to tell you something, but you can't let on that it came from me, she whispered into the phone. They're having meetings about you and the money. Aunt Karen is saying you're mentally unstable from grief and not fit to manage the inheritance. Uncle Doug mentioned something about legal options to contest the will. They're serious about getting that money, Rachel. My stomach twisted with anxiety. Thanks for telling me, Megan. Be careful, okay? And maybe consider giving Mom something small just to get her off your back. But I knew better. With my mother, there was no such thing as enough. A small amount would only be the beginning. The stress was taking its toll. I started having trouble sleeping, jolting awake at every notification ping on my phone. My work performance suffered as I struggled to concentrate during therapy sessions with patients. I lost 5 pounds in 2 weeks, simply because my appetite disappeared under the constant stress. Seeking advice, I met with Abigail for coffee at our favorite local cafe. As my best friend since college, she knew my family history and didn't pull any punches. They're financially abusing you, she said bluntly, stirring her latte, and they'll keep doing it until you set firm boundaries. But they're family, I said weakly, echoing their rhetoric. Family doesn't manipulate and harass you. Family respects your autonomy. Your grandfather did. He's the example you should follow. A coworker at the rehabilitation center, Marcus, shared a similar story when I confided in him during lunch break. His uncle had left him a considerable inheritance, and his siblings had tried the same tactics my family was using. I ended up giving in, he admitted. Gave my sister 30 grand to help with her business. It failed within 6 months and she's never spoken to me since because I wouldn't invest more. My brother got 15,000 for a down payment on a house he never bought. The money disappeared and our relationship is still strained. His story strengthened my resolve. Giving in wouldn't save relationships. It would only enable more problematic behavior and potentially destroy any chance of healthy connections in the future. Mom escalated her campaign when showing up at my workplace became her new tactic. She walked into Pacific Northwest Rehabilitation Center during my shift, teary-eyed and demanding to speak with me. I was in the middle of a session with an elderly stroke patient when the receptionist, Amber, came to get me. There's a woman in the lobby causing a scene, she whispered. Says she's your mother, and it's an emergency. I apologized to my patient and hurried to the lobby where Mom was loudly telling anyone who would listen that her daughter had abandoned her in her time of need. Mom, stop it, I hissed, pulling her toward the exit. This is my workplace. Well, you won't answer my calls, so what choice do I have? She replied loud enough for my colleagues to hear. Outside in the parking lot, I finally snapped. This ends now. You're damaging my professional reputation and crossing every boundary. I will not give you my inheritance. It's not up for discussion. But Rachel. If you come to my workplace again or continue harassing me, I'll file for a restraining order. I'm serious. Her face contorted with rage. You'll regret turning your back on family. You'll see what happens to ungrateful children. That night I changed my phone number, giving the new one only to trusted friends and colleagues. I blocked my family on social media and set up email filters to send their messages to a separate folder I could check when I felt emotionally prepared. For 2 blessed weeks, there was silence. I started sleeping through the night again. My appetite returned. I felt like I could breathe. Then the text came through from a number I didn't recognize, but the content made the sender clear. Family meeting Sunday at 2 p.m. at Shannon's house. Time to resolve this as family. Mom. My heart sank. The peace had been temporary, and somehow I knew this meeting would be different. This wasn't just another guilt trip. This was something more calculated, more dangerous. The text message sat on my phone screen like a time bomb. Family meeting Sunday at 2 p.m. at Shannon's house. Time to resolve this as family. Something about the wording felt ominous. Not a request or an invitation, but a summons. The formal tone was unlike my mother's usual emotional messages. My instincts screamed trap. This wasn't going to be a regular family gathering with casserole and uncomfortable conversation. This was going to be an ambush. I called Abigail, immediately reading her the message. "Don't go," she said without hesitation. "Nothing good can come from this. They've had time to coordinate and plan. You'll be walking into a firing squad." "If I don't go, they'll just keep coming after me," I reasoned. "They might even escalate further." "Then don't go alone," Abigail suggested. "Bring backup." "What, like you?" "No, like a lodger." The idea hadn't occurred to me. I'd been so focused on the emotional aspect of the conflict that I hadn't considered the legal dimension. But Abigail was right. If my family was getting serious about trying to take my inheritance, I needed professional protection. That evening, I researched inheritance laws in our state. I learned that as the named beneficiary in my grandfather's will, my position was legally strong. Contesting a will was difficult without evidence of coercion or mental incompetence. Given that Grandpa had been of sound mind until the end, and had even explained his decisions to his attorney, any challenge would likely fail. Still, I needed someone who specialized in these matters. After reading reviews online, I scheduled a consultation with attorney Stephanie Miller for the following morning. Her firm specialized in estate disputes, and she had a reputation for being thorough and direct. Stephanie's office was in a converted Victorian house downtown. The interior combined historic charm with modern professionalism, much like Stephanie herself. In her mid-40s, she had a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I explained my situation, showing her the text message and detailing the weeks of harassment. As I spoke, she took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "Based on what you've told me, your mother has no legal claim to your inheritance," she said confidently. "The will was properly executed, your grandfather was of sound mind, and his intentions were clear. However, that doesn't mean your family won't try to pressure you into giving them money voluntarily." "That's exactly what I'm afraid of with this meeting," I admitted. "Do you have a copy of the will?" she asked. I didn't, but a quick call to Grandpa's attorney resulted in them emailing me a copy while I sat in Stephanie's office. As she reviewed it, her eyebrows raised slightly. "Your grandfather was very thorough," she noted. "There's actually a specific clause here stating that his bequest to you is for your sole benefit and use, and not intended for redistribution to other family members. He specifically mentions that any family pressure to share the inheritance would go against his explicit wishes." I felt a rush of validation. Even from beyond the grave, Grandpa was looking out for me, anticipating exactly what would happen. "He knew them well," I said, tears threatening. "This clause strengthens your position considerably," Stephanie continued. "Now about this family meeting. I strongly advise against attending alone. Family dynamics can be overwhelming, and it sounds like they're planning something coordinated." "Would you be willing to go with me?" I asked. She considered for a moment. "I could. My Sunday is clear, and this might actually be the most efficient way to end the harassment. Sometimes a legal presence is enough to shut down inappropriate demands." We spent the next hour preparing. Stephanie suggested I gather evidence of my mother's history of financial manipulation to counter any false narratives she might present at the meeting. I went home and compiled a folder containing copies of the credit report showing the cards opened in my name without permission, bank statements showing transfers to my mother that were never repaid, screenshots of social media posts showing her luxury purchases. Immediately after claiming financial emergencies, a timeline of financial incidents throughout our relationship. I also found something I had forgotten about: a video recording from my last birthday celebration with Grandpa 3 weeks before he died. In it, he clearly stated his wishes for my inheritance, explaining that he was leaving it to me because he trusted my judgment and wanted me to have the security he hadn't been able to provide when I was younger. His words were a powerful reminder that I was honoring his wishes by protecting the inheritance. Stephanie and I agreed on a strategy. I would arrive at the family meeting alone, assess the situation, and then text her to join if necessary. She would wait in her car nearby, ready to provide legal backup. We also discussed potential scenarios and how to respond to each. Remember, Stephanie advised you have both the moral and legal high ground here. Don't let them make you feel guilty for honoring your grandfather's explicit wishes. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. Around midnight, I had a full-blown anxiety attack, my heart racing as I imagined all the possible ways the confrontation could go wrong. I called Stephanie apologizing for the late hour, but she was understanding. "This is normal," she assured me. "Family confrontations are emotionally charged, especially when money is involved. But remember, you're prepared. We have the facts, the law, and your grandfather's explicit intentions on our side." Her confidence helped calm me enough to get a few hours of sleep. The next morning, I chose my outfit carefully, a professional navy blue dress that made me feel confident and composed. I wanted to project strength, not vulnerability. As I drove to Aunt Shannon's house, memories flooded back. Sunday gatherings at her place had once been a highlight of my childhood. The aroma of her famous pot roast, the sound of cousins playing in the backyard, the warmth of family before money, and resentment poisoned everything. How had we gone from that to this? Aunt Shannon's neighborhood hadn't changed much over the years. Same mature oak trees, same well-kept lawns, same sense of suburban tranquility. But as I approached her driveway, I noticed something unusual. There were more cars than I expected. I recognized Mom's blue sedan, Uncle Doug's luxury SUV, Aunt Shannon's minivan, and several others belonging to cousins. But there was also an unfamiliar black BMW with a professional-looking man stepping out carrying a briefcase. My stomach dropped. They really had brought a lawyer. This wasn't just a family meeting, it was a legal ambush. I parked across the street, my hands shaking slightly as I texted Stephanie. "They brought legal representation. Unknown man with briefcase just arrived." Her response was immediate. "Stay calm. Observe but don't commit to anything. I'm 20 minutes away. Text when you want me to enter." Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my car and walked toward what I now knew was definitely a trap. But unlike what my family expected, I wasn't walking in unprepared. The moment I stepped onto Aunt Shannon's porch, the front door swung open. Shannon stood there, her expression a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rachel, dear, we were starting to wonder if you'd make it," she said, giving me a stiff hug. Her perfume was overwhelming, the same floral scent she'd worn for as long as I could remember. "I said I'd be here at 2, I replied, checking my watch. "It's 1:55. She ushered me inside without responding. The familiar smell of her home was there, cinnamon and furniture polish, but something was different. The usual family chaos was missing. No television blaring sports in the background. No cousins chatting in the kitchen. Instead, there was a strange formality to the atmosphere. I soon saw why. Shannon's dining room had been transformed into something resembling a conference room. The large oak table that had hosted countless family dinners was now cleared of its usual centerpiece and placemats. Instead, there were neat stacks of papers, a pitcher of water with glasses, and family members seated around it like board members at a meeting. Mom sat at the head of the table with Uncle Doug to her right. Aunt Karen, Uncle Larry, and cousins Travis and Jessica filled the other seats. And at the opposite end from Mom sat the man I'd seen arriving with the briefcase now open in front of him, revealing organized files. "Rachel," Mom said, standing up with a smile that seemed rehearsed. "Thank you for coming. We have important matters to discuss." I remained standing, taking in the scene. "Clearly," I said, gesturing to the formal setup, "this doesn't look like a family chat." "Please sit down," Mom said, indicating an empty chair directly across from the unknown man. The seat felt strategic, placing me in the hot seat facing what was obviously legal representation. "This is Harold Jenkins," Mom introduced as I reluctantly sat. "He's a family attorney who's kindly agreed to help us resolve our situation." Harold nodded at me with practiced professionalism. Late 50s gray at the temples, expensive suit, and a smile that was all business. "Miss Anderson," he greeted me using Grandpa's last name, which I had taken after college. "Your family has consulted me regarding the distribution of your grandfather's estate." "There's nothing to resolve or distribute," I said firmly. "The will was clear and the estate has already been settled legally." Mom jumped in before Harold could respond. "Rachel, we're worried about you," she said, her voice taking on that concerned tone I knew was completely artificial. "Since William passed, you've been making decisions that aren't like you, refusing to help family, isolating yourself, behaving irrationally with money." I stared at her in disbelief. This was her strategy, to paint me as mentally unstable. "I'm the irrational one with money," I couldn't help but laugh. "That's rich coming from you, Mom." Uncle Doug cleared his throat. "Rachel, no one's attacking you here. We're concerned. Your grandfather would have wanted his money to help the whole family, not just one person." "That's not what he said," I countered. "In fact, he was explicitly clear about his intentions." "Grief can distort memories," Aunt Shannon chimed in softly. "We all knew William longer than you did, dear. He always believed in supporting family." Harold Jenkins opened a folder. "I've prepared some documents that might help us move forward constructively. Your grandfather's estate was substantial, and while the will currently names you as the primary beneficiary, there are provisions in family law that recognize the moral obligations to support immediate family members." This was a blatant misrepresentation of the law, at least based on what Stephanie had told me, but I remained silent watching their strategy unfold. Mom picked up the narrative. "Rachel, sweetheart, we're not asking for everything, just a fair distribution. I am your mother after all. I raised you, sacrificed for you." Uncle Doug nodded. "Your mother is facing significant financial hardships. Medical bills, housing costs, debts that accumulated while caring for you." This was news to me. Mom had never been hospitalized that I knew of, and any financial hardships were of her own making. "We've calculated a fair division," Harold continued, sliding a document toward me. 50% to be placed in a family trust managed by your mother, with provisions for distribution to family members in need. You would retain 50% for your personal use." I glanced at the document without touching it. It was titled "Voluntary Redistribution of Inherited Assets," and was filled with legal jargon designed to intimidate. "This arrangement honors your grandfather's legacy while ensuring family needs are met," Harold explained smoothly. "It's what he would have wanted." "No, it isn't," I said firmly, "and you have no legal basis to demand any portion of my inheritance." Harold's professional demeanor slipped slightly. "Miss Anderson, family courts take a dim view of individuals who refuse to support immediate family members, especially parents, when they have substantial means. A judge might well determine that a portion of the inheritance should be redirected." This was a clear intimidation tactic, and from my consultation with Stephanie, I knew it was false. But I could see how someone without legal knowledge might be scared into compliance. "We're trying to avoid court," Mom added, tears suddenly appearing in her eyes. "Legal battles are so messy, so public. This way we keep it in the family." The others nodded in unison. It was clear they'd rehearsed this approach. "Create a formal atmosphere present, legal-looking documents, make vague threats about court, add emotional manipulation, and pressure me to sign immediately." Harold slid a pen toward me. "If you'll just sign here, we can resolve this amicably. The funds can be transferred by the end of the week." I looked around the table at my family members. Their expressions ranged from Mom's fake concern to Uncle Doug's barely concealed greed to Aunt Shannon's apparent discomfort. They were all complicit in this ambush, this attempt to bully and manipulate me out of my inheritance. The room felt suddenly hot and airless. I was outnumbered, surrounded by people who should have loved and supported me, but instead saw me as nothing more than access to money. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm me. Then I remembered Stephanie waiting outside. I wasn't actually alone. I took a deep breath, pushed back from the table slightly, and looked Harold directly in the eyes. "This is fascinating," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "You've gone to quite a lot of trouble to create this illusion of legal authority." Mom's eyes narrowed. "Rachel, don't be difficult. We're trying to help you do the right thing." I ignored her, keeping my focus on Harold. "Mr. Jenkins, I'm curious. Are you aware that my grandfather included a specific clause in his will prohibiting exactly this type of family pressure? Or that attempting to coerce a beneficiary could potentially be considered elder abuse by extension, since you're trying to subvert the clear wishes of a deceased person?" Harold's confident expression faltered slightly. Also, I continued, I notice you haven't asked for a copy of the actual will or any documentation before preparing these papers. That seems like an unusual oversight for a family attorney. The tension in the room shifted perceptibly. I reached for my phone in my purse. Before we go any further with this discussion, I said, standing up, I think we need some clarity on the legal realities here. I typed a quick text to Stephanie. Please come in now. Mom leaned forward, her patience visibly wearing thin. Rachel, sit down. This isn't a negotiation. The papers are prepared. You just need to sign them. I smiled for the first time since arriving. Funny, I brought someone too. The doorbell rang and everyone turned toward the sound in confusion. That would be my attorney, I explained. Mom's face drained of color. You're what? Aunt Shannon rose automatically to answer the door, her social hostess instincts overriding the tension of the moment. When she returned, Stephanie Miller was beside her, projecting calm professionalism in her tailored pantsuit leather portfolio tucked under her arm. Hello everyone, I'm Stephanie Miller, attorney at law, she announced, her voice carrying the perfect blend of authority and courtesy. I represent Rachel Anderson in matters relating to her grandfather's estate. The room fell into stunned silence. Mom's mouth opened and closed, without words forming. Uncle Doug straightened his tie nervously. Harold Jenkins stood up, extending his hand automatically in professional courtesy, though his expression revealed his discomfort. Harold Jenkins, he introduced himself. I'm advising the family on this matter. Are you indeed? Stephanie replied, shaking his hand briefly, before setting her portfolio on the table. That's interesting, since the estate was settled months ago with no contesting parties. She turned to me. Rachel, may I sit? I nodded, pulling out the chair beside mine. The power dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically with her entrance. Where I had been surrounded and outnumbered, now I had an ally who spoke the language of law better than Harold did. Miss Miller, Mom began, recovering her composure. This is a private family matter. Rachel is having difficulty making reasonable decisions about her inheritance. On the contrary, Mrs. Anderson, Stephanie replied coolly. From my assessment, your daughter is making extremely prudent decisions regarding her inheritance, exactly as her grandfather intended. She opened her portfolio and removed several documents. I've taken the liberty of bringing copies of William Anderson's will for everyone, since it seems there may be some misunderstanding about his intentions. She distributed the copies, placing one directly in front of Harold. You'll want to pay particular attention to Section 4, Paragraph 3, Mr. Jenkins. Harold adjusted his glasses and began reading. His expression grew increasingly troubled as he reached the section Stephanie had highlighted. The paragraph explicitly stated that the inheritance was for my sole benefit and use, and specifically mentioned that family pressure to redistribute the assets would violate his wishes. Additionally, Stephanie continued, addressing the whole table. I've brought documentation that may be relevant to understanding the family financial dynamics. She slid a folder toward Harold. This contains evidence of a pattern of financial exploitation that informed Mr. Anderson's decision to structure his will as he did. The folder contained all the evidence I had compiled: the credit report showing accounts opened in my name without permission, bank statements showing transfers to my mother that were never repaid, and the timeline of financial incidents throughout our relationship. This is outrageous, Mom sputtered, her face flushing with anger. You're making me look like some kind of criminal. These are your own actions, Mrs. Anderson, Stephanie replied evenly, and they provide important context for why your father made the estate decisions he did. Stephanie then pulled out a tablet and set it on the table. I also think everyone should hear directly from William Anderson himself on this matter. She pressed play on the video recording from my last birthday celebration with Grandpa. His voice, though weakened by illness, was clear and determined. Rachel, I'm leaving my estate to you because I trust your judgment. I've watched you build a life of integrity and responsibility despite challenges. This money is for your security for the future. I know you'll use it wisely to build. It's not for anyone else to decide how to use. I've seen how money can be misused in our family, and I'm entrusting it to you alone. Tears pricked my eyes hearing his voice again, but I blinked them back, not wanting to show vulnerability in this setting. The video had a visible impact on everyone in the room. Aunt Shannon looked down at her hands. Uncle Doug shifted uncomfortably. Even Harold seemed to recognize that his position had just crumbled. Mom, however, wasn't ready to concede. That was a private moment taken out of context. William was confused toward the end. He didn't understand the family's needs. On the contrary, Stephanie countered Mr. Anderson was documented as being of sound mind until the very end. His doctor confirmed this, as did the witnessing attorney for the will. There is absolutely no legal basis to challenge his explicit wishes. She turned to Harold, professional courtesy masking her clear advantage. Mr. Jenkins, I'm curious what legal theory you were planning to pursue here. The documents you've prepared have no legal standing whatsoever. Harold cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. We were exploring potential avenues for family support under moral obligation provisions. Moral obligation provisions, Stephanie raised an eyebrow. I'm not familiar with that as a legal concept that would override explicit testamentary instructions. Perhaps you could elaborate. It was a professional way of calling his bluff, and Harold knew it. He began gathering his papers, avoiding eye contact. Mrs. Anderson presented the situation differently, he admitted. I was led to believe there were verbal promises and prior agreements regarding the distribution of assets. There were no such promises, I interjected firmly. Mom's composure finally broke. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed, her carefully constructed, concerned mother facade crumbling. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me, by humiliating me in front of everyone with your fancy lawyer. Karen, Uncle Doug warned, placing a hand on her arm, which she immediately shook off. No, I'm done pretending, Mom continued, her voice rising. That money should be mine. I was his daughter. I took care of him. When I challenged my own anger finally surfacing, you visited him twice during his entire illness. I was there every day. I arranged his care, managed his medications, held his hand when he was scared. Where were you? A tense silence followed this question. Everyone knew the answer. Aunt Shannon, looking increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the meeting, finally spoke up. Perhaps we should take a step back. This has become more confrontational than intended. I agree, Stephanie said smoothly. And to help reset expectations, let me be clear about the legal reality here. William Anderson's will is valid and binding. Any attempt to contest it would not only fail, but could potentially result in legal costs being assessed against the challenging parties. She turned to Mom directly. Furthermore, Mrs. Anderson, the pattern of financial behavior documented here raises serious concerns. Should the harassment of my client continue, we would be forced to consider legal options, including restraining orders and possibly civil action for the previous financial impositions. Uncle Doug, always pragmatic, seemed to recognize the losing position. Karen, I think we need to reconsider our approach here. Reconsider, Mom scoffed. You're the one who said she'd cave if we presented a united front. You're the one who found Harold. This revelation confirmed what I had suspected. The entire family meeting had been orchestrated specifically to intimidate me into giving up my inheritance. I think we should discuss how you promised everyone a cut if they helped pressure Rachel. My cousin Jessica suddenly blurted out, then looked down quickly when Mom glared at her. Is that true? I asked, looking around the table. Did Mom promise you all money if you helped her get my inheritance? Uncomfortable glances were exchanged. No one would meet my eyes, but no one denied it either. I was promised $20,000 to help with my student loans, Travis finally admitted quietly. Karen said I'd get enough to renovate my kitchen, Aunt Shannon added, shame evident in her voice. The pieces fell into place. Mom hadn't just been after money for herself. She had essentially been selling shares of my inheritance to family members to gain their support in pressuring me. Why do you need the money so desperately, Mom? I asked directly. Grandpa left you $25,000. That disappeared immediately. Now you're willing to destroy our relationship over this. What's really going on? Mom looked away, refusing to answer, but Uncle Doug sighed heavily. She's in debt, he revealed. Gambling debts, serious ones. Doug, Mom snapped. Shoot up. No, Karen, this has gone too far, he replied. Rachel deserves to know the truth if you're going to keep hounding her. She's got online gambling accounts, Rachel. Has for years. She owes over $60,000 to various creditors, and some of them aren't the kind you want to owe money to. The revelation wasn't entirely surprising given Mom's history with money, but the scale of it was shocking. Gambling addiction explained so much about her desperate behavior. That's your problem, not Rachel's, Stephanie stated firmly. And certainly not a justification for attempting to circumvent a legal will. I looked at my mother, seeing her clearly, perhaps for the first time. Not as the manipulative force that had dominated my life, but as a deeply troubled woman whose problems couldn't be solved with money, especially not mine. Mom, I'm not giving you my inheritance, I said calmly. Not now, not ever, but I would support you getting help for your gambling addiction. She laughed bitterly. I don't need your charity. It's not charity, it's concern, I replied. But it's your choice. I stood up, and Stephanie followed suit. I think we're done here. My grandfather's wishes will be respected. The inheritance will be used as he intended. I looked around at my family members, people who had been willing to ambush and intimidate me for money. I won't be attending any more family meetings. And if anyone approaches me again about my inheritance, my next step will be legal action. Harold Jenkins was already packing his briefcase, clearly eager to distance himself from the failed scheme. Mrs. Anderson, I'll need to speak with you privately about my services going forward, he said stiffly. Mom ignored him, standing to face me. After all I've done for you, she said, her final attempt at manipulation. This is how you treat your mother. I could have listed all the ways she had failed as a mother, all the times she had chosen her own interests over my well-being, all the financial and emotional damage she had caused. But what would be the point? Goodbye, Mom, I said simply. Stephanie, I'm ready to leave. As we walked toward the door, Aunt Shannon hurried after us. Rachel, wait, she called. I'm sorry, this wasn't right. I nodded acknowledgement but kept walking. Apologies were easy. It was actions that revealed character. And today, I had seen the true character of my family all too clearly. Stephanie and I walked out with our heads held high, leaving behind a family in disarray, their plans thoroughly dismantled. The power had shifted, and for once I wasn't the one left feeling helpless and manipulated. The moment Stephanie and I got into my car parked safely away from Aunt Shannon's house, I broke down. The tears I had been holding back through the entire confrontation came flooding out in gasping sobs. Stephanie sat quietly beside me, offering tissues from her purse and the space to process what had just happened. You did incredibly well in there, she said, once my crying had subsided to occasional sniffles. Standing up to family is one of the hardest things anyone can do, especially when they're united against you. I can't believe they actually brought a lawyer to intimidate me, I said, wiping my eyes. And that document they wanted me to sign, would it even have been legally binding? Possibly, which is what makes their approach so insidious, Stephanie explained. If you had signed under pressure without your own legal representation, it could have created a mess to untangle. They were counting on your ignorance of the law and your emotional vulnerability to family pressure. Once I felt composed enough to drive, Stephanie suggested we go somewhere to discuss next steps. We ended up at a quiet restaurant a few miles away, where over dinner she outlined additional legal protections I might want to consider. I don't think they'll try anything like this again, but it's clear your mother is desperate, Stephanie said, sipping her iced tea. We should be prepared for other potential scenarios. We discussed setting up a cease and desist letter to formalize the boundaries I had established, and Stephanie recommended creating a formal trust for the inheritance with strong legal protections. By the time dinner ended, I had a clear plan for securing not just my inheritance but my peace of mind. The week following the confrontation was strangely quiet. No calls, no texts, no family members showing up unannounced. The silence was both a relief and unnerving, like the calm before another storm. That calm broke on Friday evening when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Rachel, it's Megan. Don't hang up. My cousin's voice was urgent, almost frightened. I hadn't seen her at the family meeting, which now seemed significant. What do you want, Megan? To warn you, I know about the meeting. Mom told me what happened. Aunt Shannon was her mother, but there's more you need to know. Can we meet somewhere public? I don't want to talk about this over the phone. My instinct was to refuse to assume this was another family trap, but something in her voice sounded genuinely concerned. We met at a coffee shop downtown the next morning. Megan looked nervous, constantly glancing around as if afraid of being seen. I didn't come to the meeting because I couldn't be part of it, she began without preamble. What they were planning was wrong. Thank you for that, at least I acknowledged. But there's something you don't know about Aunt Karen. She always called my mother by her first name, a small rebellion from childhood. The gambling debts. They're worse than Uncle Doug said. She owes money to some dangerous people. Like organized crime dangerous. My blood ran cold. What? Megan nodded grimly. I overheard her on the phone last month. She was begging for more time, promising she'd have the money soon. Said her father had died and left her a fortune. She's been telling these people she's getting your inheritance. That explains the desperation, I said, trying to process this new information. But it's not my problem she lied to loan sharks. I know that, Megan agreed. I'm not saying you should give her money, I'm saying you should be careful. These aren't people who take disappointment well, and Aunt Karen might try to deflect their anger toward you. Her warning prompted me to take additional security precautions. I installed a doorbell camera at my apartment that same day. I varied my routes to and from work. I even spoke with the security team at the rehabilitation center about not allowing my mother on the premises. These measures proved prudent just 3 days later when my doorbell camera caught a slow drive-by of my apartment building. The car was unfamiliar, but the driver was unmistakably my mother, scanning the building with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. While my mother hadn't directly violated any boundaries yet, the incident was unsettling enough that I decided to temporarily relocate. Abigail's brother Adam had a vacant rental property between tenants, and he agreed to let me stay there for a few weeks while I figured out my next steps. Just as I was settling into this temporary arrangement, I received an unexpected email from Aunt Shannon. The subject line read, "Simply, I'm sorry. Rachel, I can't justify what happened at my house. It was wrong of all of us, especially me, for allowing my home to be used that way. Karen has always had a hold over the family, and we've enabled her behavior for too long. I want you to know, I've told her I won't be part of any more attempts to pressure you. Your grandfather would be proud of how you've handled this, Shannon." The apology seemed genuine, but I wasn't ready to respond. Trust once broken couldn't be repaired with a single email. Meanwhile, my mother took to Facebook to paint herself as the victim. Posts about ungrateful children and family betrayal appeared regularly, gathering sympathetic comments from people who only knew her carefully curated version of events. I refused to engage, knowing any response would only feed the drama. Support came from unexpected quarters. My high school physics teacher, Mrs. Bennett, who had remained a mentor over the years, reached out after seeing my mother's posts. "I remember your grandfather coming to every parent-teacher conference," she wrote. "He was so proud of you. Whatever's happening, I know you're handling it with the same integrity you've always shown." Even more surprising was an email from my father's cousin Elaine, who I barely knew. "Your grandmother Anderson told me years ago that William was setting up a special fund for you because he worried about Karen's influence. The whole Anderson side supports you even if we're not in regular contact." These messages were balm to my wounded spirit, reminders that family could be supportive rather than exploitative. On Stephanie's advice, I had the inheritance placed in a protected trust with strong legal safeguards. The structure would make it virtually impossible for anyone to access the funds except me, and even provided protection in case of any future relationships or marriages. Grandpa would have approved of the prudence. With my finances secured, I began house hunting with a real estate agent recommended by Marcus from work. After viewing dozens of properties, I found a modest 3-bedroom craftsman-style home in a quiet neighborhood, not unlike the one where Grandpa had lived. The asking price was $285,000, well within my budget, even after setting aside money for repairs and updates. Just as I was preparing to make an offer on the house, a certified letter arrived at my temporary address, forwarded from my apartment. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, different from Harold Jenkins's. The letter stated that my mother was preparing to file a lawsuit claiming she had been promised a portion of my grandfather's estate verbally before his death. I forwarded the letter to Stephanie immediately. Her response was swift and reassuring. "This is a desperate intimidation tactic," she explained over the phone. "They have no case. Your grandfather's will explicitly contradicts any such claim, and the video evidence we have would demolish their argument in court. They're hoping you'll settle to avoid the hassle of litigation." Should I be worried? I asked. Not at all. In fact, if they actually file this lawsuit, we'll counter with a harassment claim and seek to have their legal fees assessed against them. I suspect this is an empty threat. Stephanie was right. No lawsuit ever materialized just as she predicted. It was one final attempt to intimidate me before my mother apparently accepted defeat, at least on the legal front. The day I signed the closing papers on my new home should have been purely joyful, but it was tinged with caution. I had arranged for a security system to be installed. Before I moved in, changed my phone number yet again, and set up a P.O. box for mail to avoid giving out my new address. As I was preparing to move from the temporary apartment to my new home, I received an unexpected visitor. Uncle Doug stood at my door looking uncomfortable and significantly older than he had at the family meeting just 2 months earlier. "Rachel," he said, keeping a respectful distance, "I won't take much of your time. I just came to warn you that Karen isn't doing well. The gambling has gotten worse since the meeting. She's talking about you, constantly convinced that you're the source of all her problems." "I haven't had any contact with her," I pointed out. "I know. This isn't about what you're doing. It's about her mental state. She's spiraling, and I'm worried about what she might do. Not to you," he added quickly, seeing my alarmed expression. "To herself. She's talking about bankruptcy, about leaving the state. Just be vigilant, okay? And maybe consider changing your emergency contact information anywhere it might still list her." His warning, while concerning, was also the first genuinely helpful communication I'd had from any family member besides Megan. I thanked him for the information, and he left, without asking for anything in return, a first in my experience with my mother's side of the family. 6 months passed, and life settled into a new normal. My modest craftsman home became my sanctuary. Each room slowly transformed with furniture and decor that reflected my personality rather than temporary apartment living. The garden, overgrown when I purchased the property, flourished under my weekend attention, becoming a peaceful retreat after long days at the rehabilitation center. The inheritance had provided security I'd never known before. My student loans were paid in full. I owned my home outright, and the remaining funds were carefully invested for retirement and potential future business ventures. Grandpa would have approved of my financial decisions, making the painful family conflict worthwhile in honoring his wishes. But money alone couldn't heal the emotional wounds of the past months. After weeks of disrupted sleep and anxiety that lingered even in my new secure home, I finally took Abigail's advice and returned to therapy. Dr. Lawson, who had helped me navigate the aftermath of a toxic relationship in my 20s, welcomed me back with the same calm understanding I remembered. "Family estrangement is a special kind of grief," she explained during one session, "especially when it's apparent. Society expects certain relationships to be unconditional, and when they're not, we often blame ourselves." Through our weekly sessions, I began to understand my mother's behavior through a different lens. Her gambling addiction explained much of her financial desperation, but Dr. Lawson helped me see the deeper personality patterns that had made our relationship toxic long before Grandpa's inheritance became an issue. "Your mother displays classic narcissistic traits," Dr. Lawson observed after hearing detailed accounts of our history. "The inability to see you as separate from herself, the expectation that you exist to meet her, needs, the rage when denied, the manipulation of others to apply pressure. Understanding this isn't about excusing her behavior, but about freeing yourself from the guilt of establishing boundaries." This framework helped immensely. I wasn't a bad daughter for protecting myself. I was an adult, making healthy choices in the face of unhealthy demands. The inheritance had merely brought long-standing patterns into sharper focus. As my personal healing progressed, I looked for ways to honor Grandpa's memory beyond simply securing my own future. After careful consideration, I established a small scholarship in his name at the local community college, where he had taken woodworking classes in retirement. The William Anderson Memorial Scholarship would help 2 students each year who demonstrated financial need and responsibility, mirroring the values he had taught me. The scholarship announcement in the local paper led to an unexpected reconnection. My father, who had drifted in and out of my life since the divorce, reached out after seeing the article. "Your grandfather was a good man," he wrote in an email that clearly took effort to compose. "He did for you what I should have but didn't know how to. I'd like to grab coffee sometime if you're willing. No pressure." Our reunion at a downtown cafe was awkward, but healing. Dad had remarried, stayed sober for 8 years now, and built a stable life selling real estate in a town 30 miles away. He made no excuses for his absence during my childhood, just expressed genuine regret and a desire to know me as an adult if I was open to it. We now meet monthly for lunch, building a relationship based on who we are now rather than the past we couldn't change. As I established these new connections and strengthened existing friendships, I came to appreciate what Dr. Lawson called my chosen family: Abigail and her brother Adam, Marcus and his wife Diane from work, my neighbor Mrs. Petrovich, who brought homemade bread when I moved in, and taught me how to care for the rose bushes in my garden. These relationships, built on mutual respect and genuine care, showed me what healthy connections felt like. Contact with my mother's side of the family remained minimal. Aunt Shannon occasionally sent cautious emails, which I answered politely but briefly. Cousin Megan and I met for coffee every few months, carefully avoiding discussion of family drama. The rest, including my mother, existed at the periphery of my life, neither actively engaged nor completely severed. As for Mom herself, I maintained strict boundaries. Stephanie had helped me create a legal communication framework where any contact from my mother came through a designated email address that I checked once a month. This allowed me to maintain emotional distance while still being aware of any truly important developments. Through this channel, I learned that Mom had finally declared bankruptcy, sold her condo, and moved to Arizona to live with a cousin. The distance provided additional security and peace of mind, though I sometimes still found myself scanning parking lots and looking over my shoulder out of habit. On the 1-year anniversary of Grandpa's death, I visited his grave with fresh flowers and a heart full of gratitude. The polished granite headstone gleamed in the autumn sunlight as I sat on the nearby bench, telling him about my new home, the scholarship in his name, and how his lessons about financial responsibility had shaped my life. "You knew exactly what would happen with the inheritance, didn't you?" I said aloud, smiling despite the tears in my eyes. "You knew Mom would see it as her money, not mine. That's why you added that clause to the will. You were protecting me even then." As I was leaving the cemetery, my phone chimed with a notification, an email from my mother's designated address. After a moment's hesitation, I opened it. "I'm 1 month sober through Gamblers Anonymous," she had written. "Part of the program is making amends. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to acknowledge the harm I caused you. Not just with the inheritance situation, but throughout your life. If you're ever willing to meet in a public place with my sponsor present, I would appreciate the opportunity to apologize in person." The message was brief, lacking the emotional manipulation and guilt trips that had characterized her communications in the past. I didn't respond immediately, knowing this required careful consideration. Was this a genuine step toward recovery, or another manipulation? I would discuss it with Dr. Lawson before deciding. Whatever came of this tentative olive branch, I knew I would approach it from a position of strength rather than vulnerability. The past year had taught me that standing firm in my boundaries wasn't selfish but necessary, that family connections should be based on mutual respect rather than obligation, and that sometimes the healthiest love we can offer is from a distance. 2 weeks after receiving Mom's email, I agreed to meet her at a cafe midway between our locations, with both her sponsor and Abigail present for support. The conversation was awkward but civil. Mom's acknowledgement of her wrongdoing was limited, but appeared sincere. I made no promises beyond agreeing to continue cautious communication through the established channels. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" Abigail asked as we drove home afterward. I considered the question carefully. I think there's a difference between forgiveness and reconciliation, I finally answered. I can forgive her for my own peace of mind without returning to a relationship that was harmful. Maybe someday we'll have something healthier, but I'm not holding my breath. As I settled into my new life, I often reflected on how money had revealed the true character of those around me. Grandpa's inheritance had acted like a chemical reagent, causing hidden truths to become visible. Those who valued me only for what I could provide had shown themselves clearly, while those who cared about my well-being regardless of financial benefit had also emerged. The inheritance my grandfather truly left wasn't just money. It was the courage to value myself enough to say no to those who would take advantage of me even when they were family. That lesson was worth more than any dollar amount could ever be. Have you ever had to stand up to family pressure about money or inheritance? What would you have done in my situation? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money at all, but the wisdom to use it wisely and the strength to protect your boundaries. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps anyone facing similar family challenges.